On the night of my 30th birthday, they placed a $1 joke check on my cake plate. The room laughed. Mom said it was enough to buy some scents. Dad said it was more than my real balance. I smiled. Slipping it into my wallet, Grandfather taught me to keep everything they give, even contempt. The next morning, the bank called. "We need to see you about that check. It activated an account your family knows nothing about." My name is Evelyn Hart. The air at Argent and Oak isn't just air. It's a curated atmosphere, thick with the scent of dry-aged beef, truffle oil, and the kind of old money that smells like expensive leather and faint, floral perfume. It was here, in this dimly lit cathedral of Denver's financial elite, that my family chose to celebrate my 30th birthday. Or rather, they chose to host an event that coincided with it. I sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, a single, unlit candle on a sliver of dessert placed before me by a waiter who looked uncomfortable. I wore a simple navy wool dress, the one I saved for parent-teacher conferences. It was warm, practical, and utterly invisible against the backdrop of bespoke suits and the shimmering parade of signature designer labels the women wore around me. My guests were not my friends. They were my father's ecosystem, men who spoke in acronyms, IPOs, REITs, SPACs, and discussed the logistics of private jets the way I discussed bus duty. Their wives, sharp and glittering, appraised each other's wrists and necklines with the precision of auctioneers. No one said happy birthday after the initial, obligatory toast. The night was not about me. It was about my father's capacity to reserve the entire restaurant. My father, Gregory Hart, held court from the opposite end of the table. At 57, he was the picture of curated power, silver at the temples, a watch that cost more than my annual salary, and the unflinching gaze of a man who has never been told no. As the CEO of Halcyon Ridge Holdings, he didn't just build properties, he hunted respect, and he always ate what he killed. Beside him, my stepmother, Lila, watched the room through narrowed, assessing eyes. She was a woman who never forgot a brand name but seemed to perpetually misplace mine. "Oh, Elara, dear," she'd said when I arrived. "That color is brave." She was sharp, all angles and quiet, cutting remarks, a perfect acquisition for a man like my father. And then there was Sloane, my half-sister, 27 years old, and already the vice president of special projects at Halcyon, a title that meant she had her own designated parking space and a budget for things that amused her. She wore a dress that looked like liquid gold, a little bonus from Dad, as she'd announced, her voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone heard. She was the heir, the product of the successful merger, while I was the relic from a previous, less profitable venture. The clinking of glasses quieted. My father stood, raising his champagne flute. The light caught the crystal, and the room held its breath, ready for the performance. "To Evelyn," he began, his CEO voice filling the space. "My eldest, 30 years old today." He paused, letting the silence build. "Evelyn, as you all know, has chosen a different path. She's a teacher." He said the word teacher as if it were a rare, slightly embarrassing medical condition. "She spends her days with children, which is a noble pursuit, a truly fascinating way to spend money, when you think about it." A wave of polite, sharp laughter rippled across the table. It was the laughter of people who understood the joke, that the only reason to work is for profit, and any other motivation is a childish folly. I felt the heat rise on my neck, but I kept my expression placid. I smiled, a small, tight curve of the lips. "In all seriousness," he continued, though his tone didn't change, "we are proud, in our own way." He sat down, and the applause was brief, punctuated by the immediate return of conversations about capital gains. Sloane took this as her cue. "Okay, present time," she sang out, signaling a waiter. A flat, gauze, rectangular box wrapped in expensive paper was placed in front of me. I looked at it. The room was watching me, the anticipation heavy. I unwrapped it carefully. folding the paper. Inside, nestled in tissue, was a plain gray t-shirt. I unfolded it. Printed across the chest in stark black letters were the words, "Another year of almost." The table erupted. This was not polite laughter. This was genuine, unrestrained hilarity. Sloane preened, basking in the success of her wit. Lila dabbed at the corner of her eye, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Oh, Sloane," she gasped, "you are just wicked." My father shook his head, a deep chuckle rumbling in his chest. "That's good, Sloane, very good." I looked at the shirt. I looked at their faces, flushed with amusement and expensive wine. I felt a sudden, strange calm settle over me. It was the feeling I got right before a standardized test. A cold, clear focus. I was not a daughter. I was a stenographer. I was recording this. I noted the exact shade of Sloane's lipstick, the way my father's left eye crinkled when his amusement was genuine, the precise, predatory stillness of Lila's smile. I was taking a deposition. I folded the t-shirt, methodically, into a neat square. "Thank you, Sloane," I said, my voice even. "It's very specific." Her smile faltered. Just for a second, confused by the lack of tears or outrage, but before she could formulate a response, the waiters descended with the dessert. It was an elaborate construction of chocolate and gold leaf, with the requisite single candle. And on the plate, beside the decadent dessert I would not eat, was the check. It was not a real check, of course. It was an oversized, novelty item, printed on glossy paper with silver, holographic ink. It was made out to Evelyn Hart in a flourishing, mocking script. The memo line read, "For being you," and the amount, in gleaming, ostentatious numbers under the chandelier's light, was $1.00. Sloane leaned across the table, her voice conspiratorial but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I figured that's about the right size for a teacher's annual bonus, right?" My father laughed. Lila added, "Don't spend it all in one place, dear." I picked it up. The paper was cool to the touch. I looked at the signature line. It was just a meaningless squiggle. I stared at the single digit. "One hurrah," flashing under the light. This was the moment, the culmination, the public, undeniable act. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it in anyone's face. I simply picked up my wallet, a simple, unbranded leather foldover, and opened it. I folded the joke check neatly in half, the silver ink creasing, and tucked it into the pocket behind my driver's license. It slid in place, resting directly against another, much older piece of leather, a small, worn envelope, cracked with age, that my grandfather had given me. No one at the table knew. They couldn't know. They saw a quiet, defeated schoolteacher, the family disappointment, absorbing her nightly dose of humiliation. They saw a woman who had failed to launch, who was almost something but never quite. They had no idea that I had been waiting for this exact, public, well-documented moment for 5 years. They didn't understand the lessons my grandfather, the true architect of Halcyon Ridge, had taught me. He had taught me that silence is not submission, it is strategy, that every insult is a piece of evidence, and that some traps are built not of steel, but of ink, paper, and the precise legal weight of public scorn. A waiter, sensing the conclusion of the ritual, leaned over and blew out the candle. The small flame vanished, and a thin wisp of gray smoke rose from the wick. Curling in the air like a signature, it was done. The joke check in my wallet felt like a cold piece of metal, a stark contrast to the worn, supple leather of my grandfather's envelope pressed against it. My father built glass towers that reflected the sky, but my grandfather, Marshall Hart, built foundations. He started as a bricklayer, with hands so calloused they felt like soft stone. And he built a company based on a simple, radical idea. You build for people, not for show. Halcyon Ridge Holdings, in its first incarnation, built neighborhoods, not exclusive enclaves. They built affordable homes with good bones, places where families could start. He was the one who taught me to see the world not as it was presented, but as it was structured. Our classroom was a chessboard in his study, the air smelling of old books and pipe tobacco. He didn't just teach me to play, he taught me to see the entire board, to understand that every piece, no matter how small, had a purpose, and that sacrificing a pawn could win the game, if you knew which pawn and when to sacrifice it. Every move, Evelyn, he'd say, his voice a low rumble as I hovered my hand over a knight. Analyze it like it's a clause in a contract. What does it commit you to? What does it force your opponent to do? Who benefits? And what's the escape hatch? He taught me patience. He taught me to let my opponent overextend, to let them get arrogant. Arrogance, he'd tap the white king, is a liability. Let them think they're winning. Let them get loud. You just watch the board. When I was 12, my father, already a vice president, already hungry, threw out one of my grandfather's old filing cabinets. I found Marshall in the driveway, quietly picking through the discarded files. He wasn't angry. He was methodical. He rescued a stack of invoices and an old letter of intent. "Evelyn," he said, holding up a crumpled receipt. "You keep everything. Keep every receipt, every letter, and every insult. They're all evidence. One day, you might need to build a case, and you can't build it from memory alone. You build it from paper." That night, at Argent and Oak, I wasn't just his granddaughter. I was his student. I was collecting evidence. Then, my father took over. My grandmother had passed, and Marshall, tired and seeing the change in the corporate winds, stepped down. Gregory became CEO. The company's philosophy shifted overnight, the motto hanging in the lobby, "Building for a better Denver," was replaced with a sleek, brushed steel logo. Marshall's philosophy of "build for people" became my father's new mantra. No margin, no mission. Halcyon Ridge stopped building homes and started building statements. Glass towers that pierced the skyline, luxury condos with $1,000 association fees, and exclusive golf communities. The company's profits quadrupled. My father became a titan, the man on the covers of business magazines. And then Lila arrived. She wasn't introduced as a girlfriend. She was announced like a new acquisition, a strategic merger. She was a PR contract made flesh, all sleek lines and social savvy, who expertly airbrushed my father's brashness into visionary confidence. She was the one who started the quiet campaign to rebrand the family, which meant managing the Evelyn problem. I was the relic, just like my grandfather's old files. I was the reminder of the affordable housing days, the brick-and-mortar past he wanted to demolish. When Sloan was born, the new narrative was complete. Sloan was the future, the heir to the glass and steel empire. She was given a seat on junior boards before she could legally drink. She was fast-tracked into a vice presidency. Her photo ops carefully managed. Her wins manufactured and publicized. I was quietly, efficiently, moved out of the frame. I was still invited to family dinners, but my seat was moved further down the table. My opinions on literature or my students were met with polite, vacant stares, conversational dead ends. I was the family's resident charity case, the pet project. My grandfather saw it all. He sat in his study, the chessboard gathering dust, and he watched. He watched my father mortgage the company's soul for profit. He watched Lila turn family gatherings into shareholder meetings. He watched Sloan be molded into a weapon of high-end consumerism. And he watched me, the quiet one, the one who still came to him, not for money, but for books. On my 25th birthday, 5 years ago, just a few months before he passed, he called me to his study. He looked frail, the strength that had laid bricks now barely enough to hold his pen. He didn't give me a gift. He gave me a task. He handed me a small, simple envelope of tanned leather, soft as an old glove. It was sealed with a wax stamp, but not with a crest, just his thumbprint. "This," he said, his voice paper-thin, "is for your 30th birthday, not a day before. Evelyn, open it after you turn 30. "Grandpa, what is it?" "It's a contingency plan." He smiled, a flicker of his old self. Think of it as a riddle, and the answer only makes sense when you're 30. I took it. It was light in my hand, but it felt heavier than my father's entire portfolio. I chose to teach public school. It was a decision that baffled and embarrassed my father. A heart, he'd thundered, wasting her time on unteachable children for a government paycheck? But my grandfather called it a long-term investment in people. He said, "Gregory builds things that can be torn down. You're building things that last forever. Don't ever forget the difference." During those last few months, his mind was lucid, though his body was failing. We stopped talking about the present and started talking about theory. He'd pull me close, his voice a whisper. "You know, Evie, most people think a contract is just static words on a page. But the best ones? They're alive. They're breathing contracts. They're designed to react to the future, to bad faith, to greed." He'd drift, and I'd listen, taking notes I didn't understand. He talked about conditional clauses, triggers, and springing rights. He spoke of legal structures that could lie dormant for years, waiting for a specific, predetermined event to bring them to life. One night, when the house was silent and the nurses were changing shifts, he gripped my hand. His eyes were bright, almost mischievous. "Evelyn," he whispered, "do you believe in invisible ink signatures?" I smiled, thinking he was wandering. "Like with lemon juice?" "Just like that," he said, his grip surprisingly strong. "Something that looks like a blank page, until you hold it up to the fire." He coughed, a dry, racking sound. "They'll provide the fire, Evie. They always do. You just be ready to read the words." That was one of our last clear conversations. A week later, he was gone. My father gave a brilliant eulogy about legacy and vision, managing to make my grandfather's life sound like a stepping stone to his own. Lila organized a reception that felt like a networking event. Sloane complained about the color black. And I took the leather envelope and I put it in a locked drawer. For 5 years. I kept it. I kept it through every condescending remark from Lila, every dismissive wave from my father, every casual, cruel joke from Sloane. I went to work. I taught my students. I paid my rent. I lived my almost life, all the while holding on to that envelope like a seed. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew my grandfather. He didn't play games he intended to lose. He built things to last. He had built affordable housing. My father built glass towers. The contrast was simple. One was a home, the other was a reflection. Last night, my family had shown me their reflection. Today, I was beginning to think my grandfather was about to show me the home he'd built for me, right in the center of their world. The headache from the party wasn't from the single glass of champagne I'd allowed myself, but from the sheer psychic weight of the evening. I woke up at 6 a.m., the precise time my teacher's internal clock always went off. The gray Denver dawn filtered into my apartment, illuminating the small pile of debris from the night before, the plain navy dress, the another year of almost t-shirt, which I'd left folded on my dresser, and the $1 novelty check. It looked even cheaper in the morning light, the silver ink flaking off at the creases. I was making coffee, mentally preparing my lesson plan for my 10th grade honors class, when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. Evelyn Hart? The voice was male, professional, and devoid of any warmth. "This is she. Ms. Hart, this is Mr. Davies from Frontier First Bank, downtown branch. I'm the branch manager. We need you to come in." My stomach tightened. I thought of my student loans, my car payment. "Is there a problem with my account? I just deposited my paycheck." There was a pause. "Your personal accounts are fine. This is regarding a different matter, an estate matter. We were alerted this morning by our trust department. Can you be here at 9 a.m.? I have to be at work. I'm a teacher." "Ms. Hart," his voice dropped, losing its corporate polish and gaining a strange urgency. "I strongly advise you to find a substitute. The trust department was alerted by an automated flag related to an item you received last night." I looked at the joke check on the dresser. How could you possibly know what I received last night? Please, he said, sounding strained. Just come to the central branch, and please, bring the check. The drive downtown was a blur. I was moving on autopilot, a cold dread mixing with a strange, electric curiosity. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Arrogance is a liability. Let them get loud. Frontier First's main branch was a temple of marble and hushed silence. It was my father's bank, not mine. I operated out of a small credit union near my school. Mr. Davies met me at the door. A man in his 50s with a suit that was immaculate and eyes that were decidedly not. He looked like he hadn't slept. He didn't walk me to a teller line. He guided me past the main floor, through a keypad-locked door, and into a windowless, wood-paneled conference room. Please, he said, gesturing to a chair. The check? My hand trembled slightly as I pulled it from my wallet. I felt foolish, handing this piece of party trash to a serious bank manager. He took it. He didn't smile. He didn't look at me. He looked at the check, spreading it flat on the polished table. He pulled a small, high-intensity UV light from his desk drawer. What are you doing? My grandfather used to be a client here, Ms. Hart, a very specific kind of client. He set up protocols. He clicked the light on. The room was dim, and the sudden, sharp violet beam hit the paper. I gasped. The joke check, which had been printed on simple glossy stock, suddenly came alive, under the signature line, where there had been only a meaningless squiggle. A line of text now glowed in faint, fluorescent blue. Marshall Hart, Auth, Trust Cert, 4A, and beneath that, a complex watermark of a key. Mr. Davies turned the light off, and the check was just a joke again. He sat back, lacing his fingers. Ms. Hart, he said, his voice quiet. That is not a check. It is a legally binding trust certificate. It is the key to activate a dormant trust account established by your grandfather. A trust? I don't understand. My father handles the estate. Your father, Mr. Davies said carefully, handles the public estate. This is a private, conditional trust. It was flagged by our system at approximately 1 a.m. this morning, when the activation conditions were apparently met. Activation conditions? He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a printout from the bank's system. This trust was set to activate under two specific conditions. The first, that the beneficiary, you, reach the age of 30. He tapped the paper. The second, well, it's why I'm required to do this by the book. He read from the screen. The trust assets shall spring to the beneficiary upon the fulfillment of a public scorn clause, defined as the beneficiary being presented in a public forum and in the presence of no fewer than 3 family members, with a gift, item, or statement of nominal value explicitly intended to cause humiliation, scorn, or to publicly affirm her perceived lack of worth. I felt the blood drain from my face, a fascinating way to spend money. Another year of almost $1. They hadn't just insulted me, they had triggered a cannon. My grandfather's invisible ink, I whispered. Mr. Davies nodded, his expression grim. He used their arrogance as the key. This trust, Ms. Hart, is now active. It is also linked directly to a safe deposit box, number 731, the opening conditions for which were, again, your 30th birthday. He picked up his desk phone, his eyes never leaving mine. Mr. Harrison, he said to his phone. Please contact legal. Yes, she's here. The certificate is authentic. He hung up and looked at me. Our legal department insists you have your own counsel present before we proceed. This is now an active and highly significant matter. I nodded, my mind racing. Counsel? My counsel? And then I remembered. The envelope. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old leather envelope my grandfather had given me, the one I'd kept for 5 years. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the flap. I'd always assumed the wax seal was decorative, but I had to pry it open. Inside there was no letter, Just 3 things. A small tarnished brass key, a number stamped into its head, 731. A single sheet of paper, folded into a square. I opened it. It was a hand-drawn map of the Frontier First Vault level, with a red X marking Vault B Section 4, and a single business card. Marla Whitcomb, Escarlo Whitcomb and Ellery, and beneath the name, in my grandfather's spiky, instantly recognizable handwriting, "For when the fire starts." I slid the card across to Mr. Davies. "This is my lawyer. I need to call her." Marla Whitcomb arrived in 45 minutes. She was the antithesis of Lila. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, practical flat shoes, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a single, worn briefcase. She didn't offer condolences for my grandfather or engage in small talk. She walked in, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Marla Whitcomb, Marshall spoke of you often. Let's see what we have." We moved back to the conference room. Mr. Davies, now flanked by a nervous-looking woman from the bank's legal team, presented the documents. Marla reviewed the joke check under the UV light. She reviewed the bank's trust summary. She was silent for a full 5 minutes, her eyes scanning the pages with terrifying efficiency. Finally, she looked up. "The signature is Marshall's, authenticated by the fluorescent mark he established with the bank in 1998. And the conditional clause," she said, almost smiling, "is a masterpiece. It's a conditional springing trust. It's unusual, but in this state, perfectly legal. The trigger event, the public act of scorn, is the catalyst. The check is the proof of receipt. It's beautiful. It's airtight." The bank's lawyer cleared her throat. "Given the magnitude of the assets, Ms. Whitcomb, we are required to disclose them." "We're ready," Marla said. Mr. Davies took a deep breath. "Ms. Hart, according to the trust charter, the assets held within are 51% of the voting shares of Halcyon Ridge Holdings." The room went silent. I felt my hearing go distant. The words echoing, 51%. "Wait," Marla said, holding up a hand, her voice sharp as steel. "Clarify, the voting rights were held in stasis, correct? Not the ownership?" "That is correct," the bank lawyer replied, reading. "The shares were technically held in this trust, but the voting rights were assigned to Gregory Hart as trustee until the activation of this clause. The charter states, upon the verified fulfillment of the activation clause, all voting rights shall transfer immediately and irrevocably to the beneficiary, Evelyn Hart." "Which was last night," Marla said, a final, definitive click. She turned to me, her eyes no longer cold, but focused. "Evelyn, we need to talk about evidence. The bank will need to verify the act of scorn, officially." This was my territory. I was a stenographer. I was a teacher. I dealt in facts. "I have the shirt," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "The one that says, 'Another year of almost.' I have the guest list from the restaurant. And my sister, Sloane, she posted a video of the entire thing, my father's speech, the check, on her public Instagram story." Marla Whitcomb allowed herself a genuine, thin smile. "She did she? Well, that's accommodating." Mr. Davies, looking immensely relieved to have a protocol to follow, stood up. "We need to open the box. It requires your key, Ms. Hart, and my key, plus our vault manager. We can have the vault ready at 4 p.m., with Ms. Whitcomb and our counsel present." "We will be here," Marla said, closing her briefcase. I walked out of the bank and stood on the marble steps, breathing in the cold city air. The world looked exactly the same, but it had fundamentally shifted on its axis. I was the same person, in the same wool dress, but I was also something else. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and dialed the front office of the high school. "This is Evelyn Hart," I said, my voice steady. "I'm afraid something significant has come up. I won't be able to make it in today. Please get a substitute for my classes." I hung up before they could ask questions. No children were involved. No students were harmed. It was just one day off. But as I stood there, with the weight of 51% of my father's world in my pocket, I knew it was the last normal day I would ever have. I went home from the bank, but not to rest. I had 5 hours until 4 p.m. My apartment, usually a quiet sanctuary of student essays and library books, felt different. It was no longer a refuge. It was an office. Marla's voice had been clipped and precise on the phone. The bank handles the asset verification. I handle the trigger verification. Get me the evidence. Evelyn, assume you're presenting to a judge this afternoon. No detail is too small. My grandfather's training kicked in. You build a case from paper. My kitchen table became a staging ground. I took the plain gray t-shirt, another year of almost, and spread it flat on the wood. It looked pathetic, a cheap joke. I photographed it with my phone, the light from the window catching the stark black letters. I photographed the tag, the seams, evidence. I retrieved the novelty check from my wallet. I photographed it in natural light, then photographed it again under my own small UV pen light, watching the blue, ghostly signature of Marshall Hart appear, just as it had in the bank. Then, the receipt. I smoothed the impossibly long bill from Argent and Oak. Celebration package, Tier 4. Private dining room fee. The total was more than I made in 2 months of teaching. I photographed the entire document, making sure the date and time stamp at the top were crystal clear. 48 guests, 48 witnesses, plus staff. The trust required at least 10 witnesses. My family had, in their typical fashion, over-delivered. But the centerpiece, the item that transformed petty cruelty into a legally binding event, was digital. Sloane. Her entire life was a performance for an audience, and last night was no exception. I opened my laptop and went to her Instagram profile. Her story from the night, a 24-hour chronicle of her own magnificence, was still active. I hit my computer's screen record function. I watched it again, this time not as a victim, but as a prosecutor. The clinking glasses, the pan of the room, capturing the faces of my father's business partners, investors, and 2 men I recognized from the City Planning Commission. Then, my father's voice, smooth and practiced. A fascinating way to spend money. The laughter, sharp and immediate. Then Sloane's face, flushed with excitement, whispering to the camera, "Now for the real present. Just wait." The camera swung around. It filmed her pushing the gray t-shirt box across the table. It filmed my hands opening it. It filmed my face, which I was proud to see remained perfectly, glacially still. And finally, the video of the check. Sloane's voice, high and mocking. "I figured that's about the right size for a teacher's annual bonus, right?" She'd even zoomed in on the $1 amount. She had documented her own breach of contract. I stopped the recording, saved the file as Exhibit A, and emailed it to Marla. This single event was the key, but my grandfather's lessons were about building an unassailable case. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern. Marla needed the pattern. I opened my old email archives. My grandfather had told me to save everything, keep every receipt, every letter, and every insult. I searched for Lila Hart. The results scrolled for pages. Emails drafted with the politeness of a razor. An email from May of 2023. "Evelyn, darling, regarding the Halcyon Charity Gala. We've decided it's best if you don't attend this year. It's a heavy press night, and we just don't want the reporters to get confused when they ask you what you do. It's simpler this way." An email from December of 2022. Regarding a holiday dinner. "Evelyn, please try to arrive after the photographers have left, and if anyone asks, just say you're consulting on a project. It sounds better." I save them. Exhibit B, pattern of exclusion. Then, I opened my text messages from my father. They were shorter, more brutal. I photographed the screen. "Sloane is bringing investors to the club. Don't show up. Heard you're still driving that old car. Not a good look for the family. Stay out of sight until you fix it. Don't come to the gala tonight. You'll embarrass yourself. Exhibit C, direct subversion. My phone rang. It was Marla. I received Exhibit A, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It's perfect. The audio is clear. The faces are identifiable. I've already dispatched a process server to Argent and Oak. They run high-end event services. Their system likely has a clean audio backup from the room's microphones. We're getting it. She took a breath. The guest list you sent me, I recognize 3 names. They are the primary investors in the new Ridgewater Heights project. Gregory Hart just humiliated his father's legacy in front of the very people funding his current deal. It's sloppy. It's arrogant.
What now? I asked.
Now, Meng, the machine starts. I am filing a sealed petition with the probate court, an emergency motion to confirm the fulfillment of the conditional trust. We are attaching the video, the photos, and the trust document. We are requesting an immediate, temporary transfer of voting rights, pending a full hearing. By the time your father gets the notification, a judge will have already seen Sloane's video. I was about to respond when my apartment buzzer rang. I didn't recognize the name on the panel. Walter Greaves.
Marla, I have to call you back.
I buzzed him in. My mind raced. Walter Greaves. He had been my grandfather's accountant, a quiet, mouse-like man who had been with Marshall since the bricklaying days. He'd retired the day after my grandfather's funeral, and I hadn't seen him since. He stood in my doorway, looking smaller and older, holding a worn leather satchel. He looked like a man carrying a bomb. "Miss Evelyn," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. "I heard a rumor this morning from an old friend at Frontier First about Box 731. Walter, come in." He stepped inside, his eyes darting around my small apartment, landing on the books. "Good. He always said you were the only one who read." He placed the satchel on my kitchen table and clicked open the brass latches. The smell of old paper, ink, and leather filled the air. Marshall was a bricklayer, Walter said, pulling out a massive, cloth-bound ledger. He believed in foundations, but he also believed in keeping a second set of books.
A second set?
Not illegal, Walter said quickly. Moral. He called them the moral books. The official books went to the IRS. These tracked the promises. He opened the first ledger. The Ridgewater Project, 1997. This was Marshall's dream, a true mixed-income community. He secured the zoning, the grants, the tax abatements, all based on one promise. 30% of the units would be affordable housing for teachers, firefighters, nurses. He pointed to a line of my grandfather's neat, strong handwriting, a promise. Then, Walter pulled out a second, glossier folder. "This is the final prospectus for the Ridgewater Heights project, filed by your father 2 years after Marshall retired. I want you to find the affordable housing." I scanned the pages, glass towers, concierge services, rooftop pools. It's not here." "No," Walter whispered. Gregory tore up the original agreement. He turned a community project into a luxury enclave, and he used the original grant money, the funds earmarked for the affordable units, to help pay for the marble in the lobby. He didn't just break a promise, he stole from the city. He wasn't finished. But how did he fund the rest? The banks knew Gregory. They knew he was a gambler, so he needed collateral. He needed ethics. Walter slid a third file across the table, a portfolio of bridge loans. He leveraged your grandfather's name. He signed contracts promising to uphold Marshall Hart's legacy of community development. He used your grandfather's reputation as a shield, as an ethical guarantee, to secure loans for projects that were the exact opposite of what Marshall stood for. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just about a t-shirt. This was about the hollowing out of a legacy. "And that," Walter said, tapping the final document, "is why Marshall wrote the ethical clause." He pulled out a single laminated page that must have been in his wallet. It was a photocopy of a section of the trust. I read it aloud. "The Marshall Hart Ethical Mandate," I read. "Should the acting trustee, Gregory Hart, or any of his designated agents, including but not limited to Sloane Hart or Lila Hart, Engage in behavior that actively undermines the ethical foundation upon which Halcyon Ridge was built. Specifically, acts of public deception, financial malfeasance regarding social promises, or the public degradation of any family member associated with the founder's original legacy. Their operational rights and authorities shall be immediately and automatically suspended, pending a full review by the beneficiary. The room was silent. The T-shirt, the $1 check, the speeches, they hadn't just activated my inheritance. They had violated their own. My humiliation was the trigger, but my father's financial and moral betrayal was the charge. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew they would do this." "Marshall Hart always knew where the stress points were," Walter said. "He knew which foundations were built on sand." He packed his ledgers. "I'll be ready to testify. You just tell me when." He left. I stood alone in my apartment, the air still smelling of old ink. It was 4:15 p.m. I picked up my laptop. I photographed every single page Walter had shown me. I created a new file. Exhibit D, the moral books. I sent it to Marla. The subject line, the foundation. The body of the email was short. "Marla, see attached. This is the case. I am leaving for the bank now. You have my full, binding, and irrevocable authorization. When that box opens at 5 p.m., I want you to act. Let's start." I hit send. I picked up my keys and the small, tarnished brass key to box 731. Sloane's video flashed in my mind, her hand pushing the T-shirt across the table. She thought she was ending a joke. She had no idea she had just pressed the button. The elevator descended with a smooth hydraulic hiss, taking us below the marble and mahogany of the main floor into the bank's true heart. The air grew colder, drier, smelling of recycled air and old paper. The vault level was a landscape of polished steel and unforgiving fluorescent light. I walked behind Mr. Davies. Marla was beside me, her briefcase clicking softly against her leg. We were joined by a woman from the bank's legal counsel and a stern-looking vault manager who had not said a single word. We stopped at a heavy steel gate. The manager used his key, and the gate slid open with a heavy, oiled thud. We were in the inner sanctum. The room for the safe deposit boxes was not grand. It was functional, sterile, and cold. The walls were lined with thousands of numbered steel doors, a silent, gleaming honeycomb. In the center was a single steel table. On it, waiting for us, was a stack of paper, triplicate forms. "If you'll please take a seat, Ms. Hart, Ms. Whitcomb," Davies said, gesturing. He and the bank's lawyer sat opposite. The vault manager stood by the wall of boxes, waiting. "First," Davies said, "the verification." He slid the top form, a 3-page document, toward me. "This is the bank's internal record of the activation of the springing trust. Triggered this morning, it confirms the conditions have been reviewed. We require your signature, acknowledging you are the beneficiary." I signed all 3 copies. Marla co-signed as my counsel. "And now," Davies said, "the box." I stood and walked with the vault manager to the wall. "Section B, row 4. He pointed to a small, gleaming door. "Number 731. I reached into my bag. My hand was steady. I pulled out the small, tarnished brass key. At the same time, I pulled out the $1 joke check. I placed the check on the steel table, a ridiculous, flimsy piece of paper in this fortress of wealth. Then I handed the key to the manager. He examined the number. 731. He produced his own, larger, institutional key. He inserted both into the 2 keyholes. He turned his key, then mine. There was a sound of heavy tumblers, a solid, satisfying ka-chunk. He pulled the lock mechanism free and handed me the small steel handle. "You may pull it out, Ms. Hart." I did. It was heavier than I expected. A long, simple silver metal box. I carried it back to the table and set it down with a solid clang. It had a simple latch, not a lock. The key had opened the door, not the box itself. I looked at Marla. She nodded, her eyes bright and focused. I lifted the latch. The lid opened with a small metallic sigh. There was no gold, no jewels. It was full of paper. It was an armory of paper. On the very top was a thick cream-colored envelope. In my grandfather's strong, spiky handwriting, it just said, Evelyn. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. It was a letter, on his old, heavy stationery. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you are reading this, then you are 30 years old, and they have done exactly what I knew they would. I am sorry for the fire I am asking you to walk through, but I am not sorry for the woman I know you will be when you come out the other side. They will have laughed at you. They will have called you small. They will have measured you with their broken, hollow rulers. I need you to remember this. You will be laughed at before you are applauded. It is the price of being first, of being different. So let them laugh. I have left you a foundation. Your father built his house on my reputation, a house of glass. I have left you the land beneath it. This box contains your tools. Use them. Do not use them for revenge. That is a small, petty thing, and you are not a small person. Use them for balance. Use them to rebuild what they tore down. The name heart used to mean something. Make it mean something again. I have set the pieces. You just have to play the game. I love you. Play the game. I folded the letter, a hot, sharp pressure behind my eyes. I looked at Marla, who was watching me. Not the box. I nodded. I'm okay. Marla turned her attention to the box's contents. She was no longer a lawyer. She was a surgeon. She lifted the remaining items out, one by one. First, a thick vellum document, bound in a blue legal cover. Certified voting proxy transfer, she read aloud, her finger tracing the embossed seal. Irrevocable, springing upon the conditions you met last night. Second, another similar document. Conditional letter of executive removal, pending board review. Third, a simple typed list. At the top, my grandfather had written, Your allies. The first name was Ruth Delgado, Chief Financial Officer, Halcyon Ridge Holdings. The second was Judge Armando Alvarez, retired, Designated Trust Supervisor, and then 3 corporate entities, Greenwood Capital, Foundation Trust, and EcoBuild Investors, the 3 green funds. Ruth Delgado, I whispered. She's been at the company forever. My father has tried to fire her 3 times, but he never can. Because she works for your grandfather, Marla murmured, her eyes scanning the list. She's been his eyes and ears. Fourth, there was a bright red, sealed envelope, just like the one he'd given me. This one had a different note. Only open this if they try to force you to sign a transfer. He anticipated a counteroffer, Marla said, a note of genuine admiration in her voice. He knew they'd try to buy you out or threaten you. Finally, at the bottom of the box, was a single sheet from a yellow legal pad. My grandfather's handwriting again. A note on timing, it read. The moment of their greatest confidence is the moment of their greatest vulnerability, when they are loudest, when they are proudest, when they have the most witnesses to their own arrogance. That is the time to strike. Do not warn them. Let their own actions be the alarm. Last night, he had described last night perfectly. As I finished reading, Marla had already pulled out her phone. She hit a number on her speed dial. We're on a secure, recorded line, she announced. She put the phone on the steel table, the speaker activating. Marla, a man's voice, deep and authoritative, came through. Judge Alvarez, thank you for being available, Marla said. I am Evelyn Hart, Mr. Davies from Frontier First, and Bank Counsel. We are in the vault. I have the original, notarized, sealed proxy documents in my hand. They are authentic. I am looking at your emergency petition now. Ms. Whitcomb. The judge's voice filled the small room. Your Exhibit A, the video, is conclusive. Your Exhibit D, the ledgers from Mr. Greaves, are compelling. I am signing the order now. The probate court recognizes the fulfillment of the conditional trust. The springing rights are active as of this moment. The court will notify Mr. Gregory Hart's counsel by the end of the day. Marla looked at Mr. Davies. Davies, who had been listening intently, picked up the desk phone built into the wall. "This is Davies. Vault B. I am with the beneficiary and counsel. We have a court order. I need you to initiate automated notification protocol 4 Alpha. Effective immediately. Target, the Board of Directors. Halcyon Ridge Holdings." He listened. "Yes, all of them. And the primary shareholders. Send the alert."
He hung up. "What does that do?" I asked.
The bank's lawyer answered, her voice precise. "It sends a secured, automated email to the entire board of directors of Halcyon Ridge and to the primary investors, notifying them that the controlling voting stake of 51% has been legally transferred from the trust managed by Gregory Hart to the beneficiary, Evelyn Hart. They are all receiving that email. Right now." My father, Sloan, Lila, they were at lunch, or in meetings, and their phones were, at this exact second, lighting up with the end of their world. "One more thing," Marla said, looking at the bank's lawyer. "The auxiliary clause, if there is any friction." The lawyer nodded, looking down at her own copy of the trust. "The trust charter is explicit. If the bank encounters any resistance in facilitating this transfer, or if the new beneficiary is blocked from accessing company records or exercising her rights, the bank is authorized, and in fact, instructed, to immediately contact the State Securities Commission and flag the corporation for breach of fiduciary duty and potential shareholder fraud." She looked at me. "It means, Ms. Hart, that if your father tries to lock you out, he will have regulators at his door within an hour. Your grandfather did not leave a single gap." The meeting was over. The air in the room felt electric. We packed the contents back into my briefcase, not the metal box. As we stood to leave, I saw the $1 joke check still sitting on the steel table, looking flimsy and ridiculous. Mr. Davies saw me looking at it. He picked it up carefully, as if it were a fragile artifact. "This," he said, "is the activating document. It's a material part of the trust's record now." He walked to a drawer, pulled out a hard, transparent plastic sleeve, the kind used for archival documents, and slid the check inside. The plastic gave it a weight, a formality it had never possessed. He handed it to me. "I believe this is yours." He then handed me a simple, blue plastic card, like a hotel key. "And this is your temporary electronic voting proxy card. It is linked to your new rights. It is active, effective immediately." I walked out of the vault, Marla at my side. In one hand, I held the key card that controlled my father's entire company. In the other, I held a $1 check, now encased in plastic, shining under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't a joke. It was a medal. The summons came via a text from my father, sent at 5:01 p.m., a mere minute after the bank's notification would have hit his phone. It was astonishingly, predictably arrogant. "Silver Butte Club, 7 p.m. We are having an extended family dinner to clear up this misunderstanding." He didn't call. He didn't ask. He summoned. He believed misunderstanding was the right word. He believed this could be cleared up. He believed that his turf, the Silver Butte, a place of old wood, old money, and unspoken rules, would give him the advantage. He was, as my grandfather had written, providing the perfect stage, confident and full of witnesses. Marla had been blunt. "He'll try to threaten or buy you. Don't engage. Let him speak. He'll be building our case for coercion." I arrived at 6:55 p.m., not in my wool dress, but in a simple, well-made black pantsuit I'd bought for my grandfather's funeral and never worn since. Marla was with me. My father, Gregory, was not expecting Marla. They were in the main private dining room. The founder's room, Gregory, Lila, and Sloan were already seated at a long, imposing table, a bottle of eye-wateringly expensive red wine breathing in a decanter. The room was full. My father had, in his infinite hubris, invited his inner circle. I recognized several board members and 2 prominent financial reporters he kept on a short leash. He intended this not as a private discussion, but as a public execution, a re-establishment of his dominance. He saw me, and his eyes narrowed with contempt. Then he saw Marla, a woman in a severe gray suit carrying a briefcase, and his face tightened. "Evelyn, this is a family dinner. Who is this?" His voice was a low growl. "This is Marla Whitcomb, my counsel," I said. We did not sit. "Counsel?" Gregory scoffed, a forced, barking laugh. "For what? For your little bank error? Sit down. Evelyn, you're making a scene." "No," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the suddenly silent room. "I will stand." Lila, sensing the shift in tactics, slid into her role as the peacemaker, the velvet glove. "Evelyn, darling, please, your father is upset. We all are. This is some ridiculous mistake, and you're frightening everyone by bringing a stranger." Sloane just stared at me, her face pale, a mask of confusion. "Evie, what is going on? My phone is blowing up. What did you do?" "I did nothing," I said, looking at Sloane. "You did? At my party? You, father, Lila. You triggered the clause." Gregory's patience snapped. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. The wine glasses jumped. The reporters watched, their eyes alight. "Clause? I've seen the emails from the bank. You delusional girl. You think some senile note from an old man changes anything? I am Halcyon Ridge. I built it." "You built on his foundation," I said, "and you violated the terms of his will." Gregory let out a true, bellowing laugh. He reached into his own jacket and pulled out a folded document and a pen. He strode around the table and shoved them into my chest. "This is what you want, isn't it? Money? You're shaking us down? Fine. This is a full transfer of your inheritance. I'll even double the pathetic amount he left you. You sign away any and all claims to this trust, and I'll keep paying for your health insurance. I'll even continue your allowance." My allowance, the $500 a month he sent me, a gesture he used to remind me that I couldn't even support myself. "You sign it," he hissed, his face inches from mine, "or you're cut off, completely. No insurance, no money, nothing. You'll be exactly what you are, a charity case who can't even afford her own rent. Is that what you want? Sign the paper. Evelyn." This was the moment, the threat, the coercion. He had done it, publicly. I didn't look at him. I reached into my own bag, pulled out the bright red, sealed envelope from the deposit box, and handed it to Marla. "What is that?" Gregory snarled. Marla, unfazed, broke the seal. "It is a pre-written, notarized legal response, prepared by Marshall Hart. It is, essentially, his answer to this exact moment." She began to read, her voice a calm, legal monotone that cut through the room. "Should Gregory Hart, or any of his agents, attempt to coerce the beneficiary, Evelyn Hart, through financial threat, including the revocation of insurance, allowance, or other sundries, such an act shall be considered an immediate and willful violation of his duties as trustee, confirming his unfitness to serve in any capacity, and will be submitted as prima facie evidence to the court." Gregory's face went from red to a waxy, mottled white. He had just walked, eyes wide open, into the final part of the trap. You bitch," he whispered, the word sharp. "And," I said, pulling out my phone, "there is this." I turned the screen toward him. It was the email from Frontier First Bank, the one I had received at the same moment he had. "Notification of transfer of voting rights. As of 4:07 p.m. today, all 51% of the controlling shares of Halcyon Ridge Holdings are under my direct control. This is not a misunderstanding. Father, it is a transfer of power." "That's impossible," Sloane suddenly shrieked, finding her voice. "It was a joke. The check was a joke. Evelyn, tell them it was a joke. You can't do this over a joke." "Your joke, Sloane," Marla said, her voice like ice, "was the legally defined trigger for a conditional trust. Your Instagram story was the affidavit. You provided the evidence, the witnesses, And the motive. Thank you. Sloane's mouth opened, but no sound came out.
This dinner, Gregory said, his voice dangerously low, is over. Get out. All of you. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. They'll be hearing from me, Marla said.
And I'm afraid, a new voice said, they'll be hearing from me, too. The door to the private room opened. Ruth Delgado, the CFO of Halcyon Ridge, stood in the doorway. She was not alone. Behind her stood two men in severe suits, their briefcases looking heavy. My internal audit team, Ruth said. Walking calmly into the room, she, like me, was not invited. But she was here. She looked at my father. Gregory, I, like all board members, received the notification from Frontier First at 4:07 p.m. This was the true, final shock. Gregory looked at Ruth, a woman he had tolerated but never controlled, and saw the end. Ruth, you have no right. I have a fiduciary duty to the company. Gregory, she said, and as the controlling shareholder has just changed, my duty is to ensure the assets are secure. We are here to conduct a full review. Lila, who had been silent, a statue of glittering rage, finally moved. She stood up, her mask of grace perfectly in place. She walked toward me. Evelyn, she said, her voice dripping with a poisonous, manufactured warmth. Stop this. Stop this, right now. Whatever game you and this woman are playing, we are a family. This man, your father, raised you. He fed you. He gave you a life. She was about to touch my arm. Mrs. Hart, Ruth Delgado said, her voice sharp. Ruth was holding a tablet. Speaking of what Mr. Hart has given, I've been reviewing the discretionary PR budget. I'm very interested in the Blackwood Strategy Slush Fund, the one that, for the past 5 years, has been paying a monthly retainer of $25,000 directly to a PER firm, a firm registered, by an odd coincidence, to your maiden name. Lila froze, her hand, inches from my arm, retracted as if she had touched a hot stove. The family argument had just been eviscerated by a line item. The entire room was silent. The reporters were not taking notes. They were simply watching, their faces a mask of pure predatory focus. The air, which had been thick with my father's rage, was now a vacuum. I looked at my father. His face was a ruin. He was beaten. I had him. I could have ended it. I could have fired him. I could have had security remove him. I could have done to him exactly what he had, for 30 years, done to me. I looked at the red envelope in Marla's hand, and then at the letter from my grandfather in my memory. When they laugh, you stand firm. When they tremble, you say little. I stepped forward. All eyes were on me. I am not firing you, Gregory, I said. His head snapped up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Not tonight. This is not a coup. It is a change in management. As of this moment, I am exercising my right as controlling shareholder. I turned to Ruth. Ms. Delgado, you will have full access. I want a temporary freeze on all executive powers for Gregory Hart, Sloane Hart, and Lila Hart, effective immediately. I want a full, comprehensive audit of the last 10 years, with a focus on the Ridgewater Project and the moral books of Marshall Hart. I looked back at my father. You will be on administrative leave for 72 hours while the audit is conducted. You will not enter the building. You will not access your accounts. You will not contact any employees. After 72 hours, the board will convene for an emergency session to review the findings and vote on your future. I did not humiliate him. I did not insult him. I gave him the one thing he had never given me: due process. I turned and walked to the door. Marla followed. The room was utterly silent. No one moved. As I passed the table with the financial reporters, I heard a whisper. It was almost inaudible, but I heard it. My God, one of them murmured to the other. It was the $1 check. The whole thing. It was the $1 check. The 72-hour freeze was not a pause. It was a detonation in slow motion. I entered the Halcyon Ridge headquarters at 6 a.m. the next morning, using the temporary proxy card not just as a voting right, but as a key. Marla walked beside me, her briefcase clicking on the marble floor. The lobby was empty, a vast, silent atrium built to intimidate. At the top of the escalators, a single person was waiting for us. Ruth Delgado. She was in the same crisp suit, holding 2 tablets. She didn't say good morning. "The audit team is in place," she said, handing me one of the tablets. "We started last night, remotely. The servers are ours. The financial records are open. It's exactly what Walter Greaves said it was." We walked into the 30th floor executive suite, my father's office. It smelled like his cologne and expensive, stale air. I didn't go in. I turned to the glass-walled conference room next door. This would be our war room. "It's worse than Walter knew," Ruth said, swiping through screens. "The moral books were the map. The digital files are the confession." The day unfolded like a criminal indictment. The countdown had begun. 71 hours. Ruth's team, a quiet group of forensic accountants who materialized in the conference room, began to paper the glass walls. They were not building a case. They were unearthing a tomb. The first revelation was the Ridgewater project. "He didn't just abandon the affordable housing clause," Ruth explained, pointing to a complex flowchart. "He monetized its destruction." The audit trail was disgustingly clear. My father had used a series of bridge loans, passed through 3 shell corporations, to buy up adjacent parcels of land around the Ridgewater plot, artificially inflating the land value of the entire district. Then, he'd gone to the city, argued that the new, inflated land values made the original 30% affordable housing promise economically unfeasible, and had the zoning requirement waived. He'd used the original grants meant for the poor to leverage the loans that priced them out. "It's brilliant," Marla murmured, looking at the board, "and utterly fraudulent." By noon, the focus had shifted. 66 hours, the new capital, the money from the investors at the Silver Butte dinner, wasn't going into new projects. It was being used as a tourniquet. "Sloan," Ruth said, her voice flat. She tapped a new screen. Sloan, in her role as Vice President of Special Projects, had been personally managing the Ridgewater Heights project. The luxury tower was, on paper, a huge success. In reality, it was bleeding. The construction costs were over budget, and pre-sales were weak. "She's been hiding the losses," Ruth said. "For 6 months, she's been using the capital intake from new investors to pay the contractors for Ridgewater, classifying the payments as future development costs." "She's running a shell game," I said, the phrase coming to me from my grandfather. "Worse, she left a trail." Ruth's team had found it, an email from Sloan to a junior accountant, sent from her personal account at 2 a.m. "We need to make this quarter look clean. Just move the Ridgewater overages into the new Greenwood project budget like we discussed. We have to push this past the new funding round. This is the shortcut method." Attached to the email was an Excel file. The file she sent the investors was named Quarterly Projections Final, but the metadata, Ruth said, zooming in, shows the original sheet name, changed just 1 minute before she sent the email. The original sheet was named Whole. Sloan hadn't just been a fool at a party. She was an active, if incompetent, co-conspirator. Ruth gathered us at 4 p.m., 60 hours. "I have to present this to the board," she said. "But I need to be clear. This isn't just a civil matter. What Sloan did is wire fraud. What Gregory did, that's a conspiracy to defraud the city and the shareholders. If they continue to deny this, if they fight this, the criminal risk is no longer a risk. It's a certainty." "They will fight," I said. "My father doesn't know how to do anything else." The next morning, I stepped away from the war room. I had a promise to keep. At 8 a.m., I walked into my 10th grade honors class. My students, who had heard the whispers, looked at me with wide, curious eyes. I closed the door, put my briefcase down, and picked up the copy of The Great Gatsby. "Page 53, I said, my voice steady. Let's talk about the Valley of Ashes. Let's talk about what happens to the people left behind by the rich. I taught for 90 minutes. I was not a CEO. I was not a shareholder. I was a teacher. I poured all my focus into those kids, into the text. It was the sanest I had felt in 36 hours. I was protecting this. This was my work. No student, no child. Would be collateral damage in my family's war. I returned to the office at noon. 48 hours. The momentum had shifted outside our glass room. The community had started to speak. Walter Greaves had made one phone call. Now, a small line of men, old men in work coats and boots, were in the lobby, waiting to talk to Marshall's granddaughter. They were the original foremen, the bricklayers, the carpenters. They brought letters, old photographs of my grandfather at building sites, and notarized affidavits about the promises he'd made to them. "He promised us a place for our kids," one of them said, his voice thick. At the same time, the Green Funds, the 3 investors from my grandfather's list, had called Marla. I took the call. "We heard the rumors," the fund manager said. "We pulled our support from Gregory years ago because he was a shark. But if what we're hearing is true, if you're really bringing back Marshall's philosophy, we are prepared to re-engage. We have $50 million in capital ready to deploy for real affordable, sustainable projects. If you're real." "I'm real," I said. "I'll send you the audit." The walls were closing in, and my father and Lila were fighting back in the only ways they knew. Lila tried the shadows, a text message, not to me, but to Marla, an untraceable, encrypted app. "This is getting so messy. No one needs to go to jail. We can find a number, a silent agreement. Everyone walks away happy." Marla photographed the screen and sent it to the probate judge. Her official reply was 2 words. "No, Marla Whitcomb, Esca." My father tried the front door. He was, as I predicted, fighting. Ruth had a tracker on the company's phone logs. My father's cell had been lighting up, calling every independent board member, one after another, all day. "No one is picking up," Ruth said, looking at the log. "Since the bank's notification and the court's emergency order, his power is gone. He's a ghost. He just doesn't know it yet." The countdown was on. 12 hours until the emergency board meeting. Ruth, Marla, and I were the only 3 left in the conference room. The glass walls were a tapestry of fraud. "You're ready," Marla said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not," I said honestly. "I'm a school teacher." "No," Ruth said, turning to me, her face grim. "You were a school teacher. Today, you are the controlling shareholder. And tomorrow, this board will need a new CEO. They will vote Gregory out. The evidence is too overwhelming. But they will be terrified of the vacuum. You need to be the plan." "Prepare an interim CEO strategy," Marla advised. "Simple, stabilize, audit, restore." I nodded, the weight of it settling on me. I looked at the glass wall, at the line item for Sloane's shortcut. I was tired. I was so tired. My phone buzzed. A text. An unknown number. "You did the right thing," it read. "Gregory Hart is a disgrace to the Silver Butte Club. He's been using the club's discretionary contract for years. I'm the manager. I can't testify, but check the vendor contract for the private rooms. Specifically, the clause on service hallway maintenance. Check the camera logs for the hallway leading to the men's restroom, the one he always uses." I read it twice. "Marla, I think I just found the camera." Judge Alvarez, having received the final package from Marla, had already acted. A courier arrived with a sealed document. He had fast-tracked the probate filing. The order was stamped, final, and absolute. The conditions of the trust were officially, judicially, satisfied. We had the company, we had the cause, we had the votes. And now, thanks to an anonymous club manager, we had the final nail. We had the visual evidence of my father's public, profane humiliation of me, recorded on a security camera in a hallway he thought was his private kingdom. "Get the feed," I said to Marla. The emergency meeting was in 12 hours. The 30th floor of the Halcyon Ridge headquarters was a glass box in the sky, designed to make its occupants feel omnipotent, untouched by the city bustling far below. Today, it was a court, and the altitude offered no escape. It was 9 a.m., the emergency board meeting. I sat at the head of the long, reflective glass table. My father's chair. I had chosen it deliberately. Marla Whitcomb sat to my right, her files arranged in 3 precise, thin stacks. Ruth Delgado sat to my left, her tablet online, the audit data synced and ready. The attendees were a study in tension. The 5 independent directors, men and women who had grown wealthy and complacent under my father's rule, sat staring at their empty coffee cups, refusing to make eye contact with me. The representatives from the 3 green funds, the ones from my grandfather's list, sat opposite them, their expressions alert, almost eager. They were not my father's allies. And at the far end of the room, seated in a single chair against the glass wall overlooking the city, was Judge Armando Alvarez. He was not here to preside, but as the court-appointed trust supervisor, his presence was a silent, ironclad validation of the entire proceeding. At 9:02, the glass doors flew open, slamming against the stoppers. My father entered. He was not in his usual, impeccable suit. His tie was loose, his face a deep, mottled red. He was a storm. He was followed by Sloane, who looked pale and terrified, and a sharp-looking lawyer I didn't recognize. "This is a joke," Gregory roared, stalking toward the table. He didn't take a seat. He slammed his palms on the glass. "You can't do this. This is my boardroom." "Mr. Hart," Marla said, her voice a calm, cold counterpoint. "Please take a seat. You are here as an observer, at the board's discretion. You have been suspended of all executive functions." "Suspended by her?" he spat, jabbing a finger toward me. "By this child? This entire farce is based on a lie, a fraudulent, nonsense document, a fake check, a gag gift. You cannot seize a multi-billion-dollar corporation based on a joke." His new lawyer stepped forward. "My client, Mr. Hart, formally requests the board nullify the illegal transfer of voting rights. The premise is unsound. The trigger was manufactured, and the entire action is a malicious, opportunistic seizure of assets." Marla let the silence hang for a beat. "A sound, if fictional, argument. However, we have a few procedural points to clarify. First, the check itself." She nodded to Ruth. A large screen at the end of the room lit up. Mr. Davies, the branch manager from Frontier First Bank, appeared via a secure video link. "Mr. Davies," Marla said, "can you confirm for the board the nature of the activating document you reviewed?" "Yes, Ms. Whitcomb," Davies said, his voice crisp. "The item presented by Ms. Evelyn Hart was a certified trust certificate, designed to look like a novelty item. It was authenticated by its unique fluorescent watermark and signature code. Established by Marshall Hart in 1998, it is a legal, binding, and fully executed key to the conditional trust. The bank, and by extension the court, recognizes its absolute validity." Gregory's lawyer looked flustered. That's theatrical trickery. It's not. It's legal." Judge Alvarez spoke for the first time. His voice, though quiet, silenced the room. "I have reviewed the trust, the instrument, and the order. The transfer of the 51% controlling interest to Ms. Evelyn Hart is final, absolute, and recognized by the probate court. Please move on. Ms. Whitcomb." Gregory looked like he'd been struck. He stared at the judge, who simply stared back. "Thank you, Your Honor," Marla said. "That brings us to the next point, the activation of the Marshall Hart ethical mandate. The trust charter clearly states that any executive engaging in public degradation of the founder's legacy or family shall be subject to immediate suspension. Mr. Hart has argued this was a private family matter." "It was," Gregory yelled. We have evidence to the contrary, Marla said. Last night, we received an anonymous tip from an employee at the Silver Butte Club who was disgusted by Mr. Hart's behavior. She nodded to Ruth again. The screen changed. It was not Sloane's blurry video. It was a high-resolution, black-and-white feed from a service hallway. The audio was sharp. The board watched. They watched my father shove the legal document into my chest. They heard his voice, loud and clear. "You'll be exactly what you are. A charity case who can't even afford her own rent." They heard him threaten my health insurance. They heard the full, profane, public humiliation. One of the directors, a woman named Cynthia, physically recoiled. The video went black. "The ethical violation is confirmed," Marla stated. "We are now ready for the first vote." Ruth spoke. "The first motion," she said, her voice resonating. "A resolution to formally suspend Mr. Gregory Hart from his positions as CEO and chairman of the board for a period of 90 days, pending the results of the full forensic audit." "You can't," Gregory sputtered. "I vote aye," I said clearly. My 51% vote appeared on the screen. The green funds voted aye in unison. After a beat, all 5 independent directors, one by one, their faces grim, tapped aye. "The motion passes," Ruth announced. 9-0. "Second motion," she continued, not missing a beat. "A resolution to appoint Ms. Evelyn Hart as interim chairwoman and acting chief executive officer, effective immediately." This was it. "Aye," I said. The green funds hit aye. The independent directors paused. This was harder. They were terrified. But I saw the woman. "Cynthia, meet my gaze." She tapped aye. Another followed. The remaining 3, terrified of committing, tapped abstain. "The motion passes," Ruth declared, "by a controlling majority." "Finally," Ruth said, "a third motion, a resolution to immediately establish the Marshall Hart Housing Fund, as per the founder's original charter, and to allocate 10% of quarterly net profits to the fund, beginning in the first quarter." "Aye," I said. This time, everyone, the green funds, the independent directors, hit aye without hesitation. They needed to be on the record supporting something good. "Motion passes, unanimously," Ruth said. Gregory looked at Sloane, his face a mask of disbelief. Sloane, who had been silent and shaking, suddenly stood up. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This isn't real. She trapped us. This is entrapment. She planned this. She wanted us to humiliate her. She set me up. Tell them, Evelyn, tell them you set us up." She was appealing to the board, her eyes wild. I didn't know about the whole." She had said the word. Ruth's face didn't change. She simply tapped her tablet. The screen changed to the spreadsheet, the one showing the losses, the one where Sloane had used the new investment money to cover the old debts. And in the corner, the file's metadata, clearly displaying the original sheet name, whole. "Ms. Hart," Ruth said, addressing Sloane directly. "This spreadsheet, which you emailed to the accounting department, constitutes wire fraud. The investors you deceived are in this room." The green fund reps leaned forward, their faces like granite. "Sloane," Marla said, her voice suddenly low, almost kind, "I am not your lawyer, but I am strongly advising you to stop speaking. You are actively incriminating yourself. You have the right to remain silent." Sloane crumpled, as if her strings had been cut, and fell back into her chair, covering her face. I stood up. The room went silent. "This is not," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet, "about sending anyone to jail today. This is about transparency. The lies are over. The moral books that my grandfather kept are now the only books. We will be transparent with the city, with our shareholders, and with our partners. Ruth Delgado will continue her full forensic audit. Marla Whitcomb will oversee our legal compliance." I looked at the company's PR director, who was waiting by the door. "You can send the press release." The release was already on the wire. It was simple. No mention of fraud or family. Just, Halcyon Ridge Holdings announces new leadership. Evelyn Hart, granddaughter of founder Marshall Hart, appointed interim CEO. Pledges return to founder's philosophy of community-based housing. The Green Fund investors stood, nodded to me once, and filed out. The independent directors, looking relieved, followed. Flowers, I was told later, began arriving in the lobby just an hour after. Dozens of bouquets. They were not for me. They were addressed to the Marshall Hart Housing Fund, from construction unions, from community leaders, from old bricklayers. They had been waiting. The room was empty, except for my family. Sloan was sobbing. Gregory hadn't moved. He was staring, not at me, not at Sloan. He was staring past me, at the far wall. I turned to see what he was looking at. It was the official corporate portrait, a large, oil-on-canvas painting of Marshall Hart, not in a suit, but on a work site, a blueprint in his hand, the son at his back. My father, Gregory, just stared at the painting, his face no longer red, but a flat, dull gray. He was silent. He looked, for the first time in his life, utterly and completely beaten. The boardroom, once a stage for a public execution, became my office. But it was not a comfortable one. The 72-hour suspension felt less like a victory and more like the ticking clock of a bomb I now had to defuse. The aftershocks began immediately. The first was from Lila. It came not as a call, but as an email, sent from a new, anonymous address at 3 a.m. It was brief and stripped of all her performative warmth. Evelyn, this entire situation is a tragedy. Your father is a broken man. I am leaving the penthouse, as I assume you will want it. I ask only for one thing: discretion. There is no need for this to be any messier. Allow us to keep our dignity. We can sign whatever is necessary for you to let this go and allow your family to maintain some semblance of face. Face, dignity. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was, as always, trying to manage the public relations of her own ruin. She was offering a deal. Her silence in exchange for mine. I thought about the years she had spent quietly, politely, surgically excising me from the family narrative. I thought of the emails, the seating arrangements, the suggestions that I stand away from the press. I wrote back one sentence. Lila, the truth is polite enough. I hit send and archived the thread. The second encounter was harder. Sloan requested a meeting. She didn't text or call. The request came through Marla. She was terrified of me, and she had every right to be. I agreed to see her. Not in the 30th floor glass box, but in a small, neutral conference room on the 10th. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The liquid gold dress and the sharp, mocking confidence were gone. She was 27 years old, wearing a simple gray sweater, her face pale and puffy, her hands shaking. She looked like one of my 10th graders after a devastating social failure. She didn't carry a designer bag. She was clutching a crumpled tissue. She sat opposite me and didn't speak for a full minute. She just cried, silently, miserably. Sloan, I said finally, my voice gentle. Dad, he won't talk to me, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He blames me. He said I was an idiot, that I handed you the gun, that I posted the hole. He said I ruined him. He's wrong, I said. He ruined himself. You were just a tool he used. This seemed to break her. A tool, she repeated, nodding. That's it. That's all I am. I was the vice president of special projects, Evelyn, and I don't know who I am outside of that title. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know what's real. He just told me what to do, what to sign, where to stand, and I did it, and I loved it, because it made me feel important. She looked up at me, her eyes raw. Am I going to jail? I looked at her, really looked at her, the product of my father's world, polished, expensive, and completely hollow. My grandfather had given me a foundation.
My father had given her a facade. That, I said, is up to the board and the district attorney. Based on what the full audit reveals, Ruth is not required to report your incompetence, but she is required to report your fraud. She flinched, a full-body shudder. But I am not my father. Sloane, I said, leaning forward. I am not interested in destroying you. I am interested in accountability. What? What does that mean? It means you have a choice. You can follow Lila's path and try to negotiate for face and disappear, or you can do something real, something my grandfather would have respected. You can make amends. How? I have nothing. I don't know anything. Good, I said. That's the perfect place to start. I am offering you a new job, not a title, a job. The Marshall Hart Housing Fund is now active. We have a 10% profit allocation, but no staff. I'm offering you the first position, project associate. You'll answer the phones. You'll file the permits. You'll learn, from the ground up, how to actually build one of the affordable units you tried to hide. You'll learn project management. The real way, not the shortcut method. Your pay will be the same as any other entry-level associate. You will report to a board that includes me and the community leaders you and Dad defrauded, and you will start tomorrow. She stared at me, her mouth open, searching for the trick. You want me to work for you? I want you to work for the people you harmed, I said. I'm offering you a path to redemption. Sloane, it's a harder job than you've ever had, and it comes with no glory. It's your one chance to build a person, not a title. She was silent for a long time. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I echoed. I accept. No conditions. She stood up, still shaking, and walked out of the room. I had just made the first, and possibly most foolish, executive decision of my new career. The third aftershock was a text message from my father. He, of course, did not request a meeting. He was still suspended, locked out of his kingdom. The text came late at night. I gave that company 30 years of my life. It was a statement of profound, arrogant self-pity. He saw his 30 years as a sacrifice, a gift he had bestowed. I looked at the message, the blue bubble glowing in the dark of my apartment. I thought of the old men who had come to the office, the ones who had worked for Marshall. I thought of their calloused hands, their stories of my grandfather bringing hot soup to the work sites in the dead of winter. I typed my reply. Grandfather gave other people a lifetime in a home. The audit continues. Gregory, I'll see you at the board meeting. I put the phone down and turned off the ringer. The days that followed were a blur. I was two people, from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. I was in the glass tower, sitting with Ruth and Marla, sifting through the wreckage of my father's reign. The independent directors had, in their panic, approved my first major directive, the full conversion of the Ridgewater Heights project. The luxury tower was to be converted, immediately, into a mixed-income community. 30% of the units, as my grandfather had originally promised, would be designated affordable housing. The glass tower was becoming a symbol, not of my father's greed, but of my grandfather's reclamation. And then, at 6:30 p.m., I would drive to my school. The principal had, of course, heard. The story of the teacher CEO was the one thing the media had managed to get right. They were camped outside the school, outside my apartment. From the classroom to the boardroom, one headline blared. I had refused all interviews. My only statement, issued through Marla, was simple. I am doing my job. This week, my 10th graders were having their poetry slam and a book drive. I had promised I would be there, and so, on Thursday night, I sat in the back of the hot, crowded gymnasium, not as a CEO, but as Ms. Hart. I listened to my students read their fragile, powerful, angry poems. I clapped until my hands hurt. I felt, for the first time in a week, like I could breathe. I was still me. This was the foundation. The glass tower couldn't touch this. On Friday, with the 90-day suspension in place, but with the question of a permanent CEO looming,
Ruth and Marla and I had dinner. "You're doing well," Ruth said, stirring her coffee. "The board is impressed. The Ridgewater conversion bought you a lot of goodwill." Sloane actually showed up for her first day. She filed paperwork for 4 hours and cried, but she stayed. "It's not enough," Marla said, tapping her pen on her legal pad. "You're the interim CEO. Evelyn, interim is a wound. The company is bleeding, and you're a bandage. The investors, the real ones, the green funds, they're happy, but they're waiting. They're not deploying that $50 million until the interim tag is gone. They need to know who is in charge." "What's left to do?" I said, exhausted. "We have the votes. The board is on my side. Gregory is suspended. It's time to checkmate the king." "Evelyn," Ruth said, her voice low. "That's what Marshall would have said. The king is off the board, but he's not dead. He's just suspended." "Judge Alvarez called me this afternoon," Marla said, cutting to the point. "He, too, is concerned about the interim tag. He reminded me that your position as official permanent CEO is not quite solidified. There is one last vote required, and there is one last piece of the trust that hasn't been executed." I looked at her. "What are you talking about?" "I have the shares." "You have the rights," Marla corrected. "But the trust, as the judge reminded me, contains a final lock, a final key clause. It's the very last item. It states that the beneficiary will only be confirmed as the permanent CEO upon one final public action." "Another one?" I groaned. "This one is different," Marla said. "It's not a trigger, it's a test of leadership." She read from the document, "The final lock shall be opened, and the beneficiary confirmed, only when she uses the very instrument of her public scorn to create an act of public good, witnessed by the community she serves." We all sat in silence. "The instrument of her public scorn," I whispered. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the hard plastic sleeve. I laid it on the table. The $1 joke check. "This," I said. "He meant this." "He meant this," Marla affirmed. "The investors, the board, the judge, they're all waiting for you to solve this last piece of the puzzle. Evelyn, they're waiting to see what you do with it. This is the last move." The Ridgewater site was not a construction yard. It was a field of promises, both broken and new. The day of the community announcement was bright, clear, and cold. The glass skeleton of my father's abandoned luxury tower loomed over us, a monument to his hubris. But we were not there for the tower. We were on the ground. I had set up a simple stage, not a podium, on the patch of land my grandfather had originally designated for a community park. The audience was not the financial elite. It was the press, yes, but they were outnumbered by the real stakeholders. Dozens of community leaders, families from the surrounding neighborhoods, and, in the front row, the contingent of my grandfather's old workers, their faces weathered and hopeful. Ruth was at my side. Marla was standing with Judge Alvarez, who was here, again, as an observer, and in the back, standing under a lone tree, was Sloane. She wore a simple jacket and a baseball cap, a clipboard in her hand. She was not part of the presentation. She was just there, on the job. I was about to step up to the microphone when a disturbance rippled through the back of the crowd. A black sedan, one of my father's, had pulled onto the grass. He got out. Gregory Hart. He was in a suit, but it was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. He looked thinner, and his eyes had a desperate, wild energy. He strode through the crowd, which parted for him, a mixture of fear and disgust. "I have a right to be here," he shouted, not to anyone in particular. "This is my company. This is my land." The press swarmed, cameras flashing. This was the scene they had been waiting for. He made it to the stage and confronted me. "You," he spat. "You think you can erase me? I am Gregory Hart. I am this family." I looked at him, the man who had terrorized me, who had built a life on rage and reflection, and I felt nothing, just a deep, cold calm. My grandfather's words echoed. "When you hear them laugh,
Count your heartbeats. When it's steady. My heart was steady. You're right. Father, I said, my voice carrying over the microphone, silencing the crowd. This is about the Hart family, and as a member of the Hart family, you should be up here. I gestured to the empty space beside me. He looked confused. His rage momentarily deflated. This was not the fight he had prepared for. He stepped up, cautiously. I turned to the crowd. My father is right. This is about legacy. It's about what the name Hart means. I reached under the lectern and brought out a simple, framed object. I held it up. The sun glinted off the hard plastic sleeve, off the silver ink. My father gave me this on my 30th birthday, I said. He and my sister presented it to me as a public joke, to remind me of my worth. It is a $1 check. The crowd murmured. The old workers in the front row looked angry. I turned to my father. Do you remember this? He stared at the check, the instrument of his victory. Now my weapon. It was a joke, he whispered, his bravado gone. It was, I agreed. And it was also the final key to my grandfather's trust. He wrote a final lock clause. It said I could only become the permanent CEO when I proved my leadership, when I could take the very instrument of my public scorn and turn it into an act of public good, witnessed by the community. I turned back to the crowd. My voice was clear and strong. So, that is what we are doing today. This $1 check, this symbol of what my family thought I was worth, is now up for auction. A gasp went through the reporters. Gregory's head snapped up. I am auctioning this $1 check, I declared. With a starting bid of $250,000, every single cent, including the $1, will go directly to the Marshall Hart Housing Fund to build the very first community home on this spot. Before the reporters could even process it, a voice called out from the side. $250,000. The Greenwood Capital Fund bids $250,000. Another voice, from the EcoBuild investors. $300,000. The Foundation Trust. $350,000. It was a cascade. The investors my grandfather had trusted, the ones I had brought back, were putting their money where their mouth was. The bidding climbed, reaching $500,000 in less than a minute. Then, a man in the front row, one of the old bricklayers, stood up. He was holding a crumpled dollar bill. "We'll add $1 to that," he shouted. The other workers stood, all pulling single-dollar bills from their wallets. A wave of symbolic support. The crowd erupted in applause, a genuine, joyous sound. The auction was over. The point was made. All eyes went to my father. He stood on the stage, a man marooned, watching a world he had controlled celebrate its liberation from him. He looked at the check. He looked at the workers. He looked at the ruins of his tower. He stepped to the microphone. His voice was not a roar, but a dry, cracked whisper. "My father," he said, his voice shaking. "Marshall. He tried to teach me about foundations. He said you build for the people, not for the skyline." He choked on the words. I forgot what the old man taught. Today, I'm reminding myself. It was not a full apology. It was not a confession, but it was, in its own broken way, the truth. It was a public acknowledgement. I stepped up beside him. I didn't hug him. I didn't console him. I didn't humiliate him. I simply stood there and nodded. Once, accepting his statement, the public act was complete. On the side, Judge Alvarez looked at Marla. He took a tablet from his briefcase, signed the screen with a stylus, and nodded. The interim was gone. The last lock had clicked open. My father, looking utterly empty, stepped down from the stage and walked, alone, to his car. He didn't look back. I took the microphone. "And now," I said, "our Chief Financial Officer, Ruth Delgado, will announce the new plan for Ridgewater." Ruth stepped up, her face radiating a calm competence. "As of today," she announced, "the Ridgewater Heights project is canceled. It is replaced by the Ridgewater Community Project. We are building 200 units on this site. As per Marshall Hart's original promise, 60 of those units,
30%, will be designated affordable housing. We will also be funding a scholarship program for the children of this neighborhood. We are not just building homes, we are rebuilding a promise. The applause was deafening. It was a roar of relief, of victory. I looked back, into the crowd. I saw Sloane. She was not clapping. She was standing by the tree, her clipboard pressed to her chest. She was wearing a simple laminated name badge. Sloane Hart, Project Associate. And as she watched the community leaders and the old workers embrace, her face broke into a small, hesitant, genuine smile. Later, a reporter pushed a microphone in my face. Ms. Hart, is this revenge? Is this what this was all about? Revenge on your family? I looked at the reporter. I thought about the $1 check, the years of smallness, the glass tower. I'm not seeking revenge, I said, the words coming out clear and true. I am just restoring the original definition of the Hart name. The new Halcyon Ridge lobby is not on the 30th floor. It's on the ground floor, open to the street, and in the center of the atrium, where my father once had a statue of himself, there is a simple granite pedestal. On it, behind bulletproof glass, is the $1 joke check. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque is bolted to the stone. It reads, "Every insult can become a key, if you know how to hold it." And in my office, which is not my father's old office, I have my own frame. It holds the last letter my grandfather ever wrote me, the one from the box. I read the last lines every day. When you hear them laugh, count your heartbeats. When it's steady, that's when you speak least and win most. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Your support means everything. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give this story an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear it.